The morning sun hadn't fully climbed over the rooftops yet, but inside the warehouse the air already buzzed with the clatter of metal carts, the hum of forklifts, and the low murmur of workers getting into their rhythm. Boxes stacked high, conveyor belts rolling, radios crackling with orders. It was just another Tuesday for most. But for one man quietly moving among the chaos, it was anything but ordinary. He wore the same navy blue uniform as everyone else, slightly too big, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His boots were scuffed, his cap pulled low over his forehead. No one paid him much attention. He looked like any other temporary hand brought in to cover the summer rush, just another face in a sea of faces. But beneath that worn cap was a mind that had built this entire operation from a single storefront 20 years earlier. He wasn't supposed to be here, not like this, not in disguise, but lately, something had felt off. Reports from upper management sounded too polished, too perfect. Real life was never that clean. So he decided to see for himself. As he stacked cans of soup onto a pallet, he kept his eyes and ears open, not to spy exactly, but to listen, to the tone in people's voices, the way they treated each other when no one important was watching. That's when he heard it. A sharp laugh, louder than the rest, cutting through the warehouse noise like a blade. "Hey, slow down there, Grandpa. You're blocking the whole aisle." The voice was young, smug, dripping with mockery. It came from near the break room doorway, where a supervisor stood with his arms crossed, smirking at an older man struggling to push a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. The older man didn't say much. He just paused, adjusted his grip on the handle, and kept moving. Slowly, carefully, like every step mattered. His uniform hung loosely on his thin frame, and his hands trembled slightly, but his eyes stayed fixed ahead, as if ignoring the jab might make it disappear. The supervisor laughed again, turning to a couple of younger workers nearby. "Seriously, how does he even pass the physical? I swear HR must have been asleep that day." More laughter followed, not loud or cruel, just casual, thoughtless. The kind of teasing that slips out when people think no one in charge is listening. The man in the cap stopped stacking. His fingers tightened around a can of beans. He didn't look up right away. He didn't want to draw attention. But inside, something shifted. It wasn't just anger, it was disappointment. Deep, quiet disappointment. This wasn't the culture he'd tried to build. He'd always believed that how a company treated its most vulnerable employees said everything about its soul. And right now, that soul felt bruised. He waited until the group dispersed before walking over. The older man was now wiping down a shelf near the employee entrance, moving with the kind of patience that only comes from years of practice. His name tag read E. Callahan. His silver hair was neatly combed, his shoes polished despite their age. "Need a hand with that?" the disguised man asked, keeping his voice neutral. Mr. Callahan glanced up, surprised but polite. "Nah, I've got it. Just takes me a minute longer than most. Arthritis, you know?" "Yeah," the other man said, nodding. "I know." He didn't offer more. Didn't introduce himself. Just picked up a rag from the nearby cart and started wiping the opposite end of the shelf. For a few minutes they worked in silence, two men from completely different worlds, side by side in a fluorescent-lit hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and cardboard. After a while, Mr. Callahan spoke again, voice low. "You new here?" "Just filling in," came the reply. "Heard they were short-staffed." "Good of you," Mr. Callahan said. "Most folks don't stick around long in this heat. Too much lifting, not enough thanks." There was no bitterness in his tone, just a quiet acceptance, like he'd made peace with being overlooked. That made it worse. Later, during a short break, the disguised man sat on a bench outside the loading dock, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. He watched Mr. Callahan walk slowly toward the time clock, his back slightly bent but his posture still proud. Other workers passed him without a word. Some didn't even look up from their phones. Back inside, the supervisor, Travis according to his badge, was giving orders with an air of authority, joking with his team like nothing had happened. Like dignity was something you could afford to waste on someone who wouldn't fight back. The man in the cap finished his coffee and stood up. He didn't feel like a CEO right now. He felt like a witness. And witnesses had a choice: stay silent or do something. He walked to the far end of the warehouse, pulled out a small unmarked phone from his pocket, and dialed a number only 3 people in the world knew. "It's me," he said quietly. "Pull Mr. Callahan's file, full history, and get me everything on Supervisor Travis, performance reviews, incident reports, peer feedback. I want it all by lunch." He hung up and took a deep breath. The warehouse noise swirled around him: beeping forklifts, shouting voices, the thud of boxes hitting the floor. But in his mind, everything had gone still. He'd come here looking for truth, and he'd just found it in the quietest corner of the building, carried by a man no one thought mattered. What he did next wouldn't just change one person's day. It would send ripples through the entire company. But for now, he went back to stacking soup cans, blending into the background once more, watching, listening, and waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a leader can do is remember what it feels like to be invisible. The next morning arrived with the same hum of activity: forklifts beeping, radios squawking, the steady rhythm of work unfolding like it always did. But for the man in the worn cap, everything felt different. He couldn't stop thinking about the quiet dignity in Mr. Callahan's eyes the day before, or the careless laugh that had cut through it like glass. He'd spent the night reviewing files on his encrypted tablet in a nearby motel room, but numbers and reports didn't tell the whole story. He needed to see the person behind the paperwork. So when lunchtime rolled around, he didn't head to the break room with the others. Instead, he grabbed a brown paper bag, plain turkey sandwich, apple, bottle of water, and walked toward the far corner of the employee lot, where a few old picnic tables sat under a patchy shade tree. He spotted Mr. Callahan already there, sitting alone on a bench, unwrapping a small container of what looked like homemade soup. He hesitated for just a second, then walked over. "Mind if I join you?" Mr. Callahan looked up, surprised but not unwelcoming. "Plenty of room," he said, shifting his lunch slightly to make space. They ate in comfortable silence at first, the kind that only exists between people who don't feel the need to fill every quiet moment with noise. A breeze rustled the leaves above them. Somewhere in the distance, a truck engine rumbled to life. After a while, Mr. Callahan spoke. "You're not from around here, are you?" "Not really," the other man replied. "Just passing through for a bit." "Huh. You've got that look like you're watching everything but saying nothing." The disguised man smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just a good listener." Mr. Callahan chuckled softly. "Good listeners are rare. Most folks hear what they want to hear, not what's actually being said." They talked then, not about work, not about the warehouse, but about baseball. About how the local team hadn't won a championship in 30 years, but people still showed up every Sunday, rain or shine. They talked about the price of eggs doubling in 6 months, and how his neighbor's dog learned to open the mailbox. Small things, human things. Then, almost casually, Mr. Callahan mentioned his granddaughter. She's 16, bright as they come, wants to be a nurse. He paused, stirring his soup with a plastic spoon. "She's got this condition, something with her lungs. Needs special treatments. Insurance covers most of it, but not all, so I pick up extra shifts when I can." He said it without drama, without asking for sympathy. Just stated it like it was another fact of life, like the weather or the price of gas. But the weight of it hung in the air between them. The man in the cap felt something tighten in his chest. He'd built a company that moved millions of dollars worth of goods every week. He'd sat in boardrooms with people who measured success in stock prices and quarterly growth. But here, under a scraggly tree in a cracked parking lot, real success looked like an old man working past retirement age to help his granddaughter breathe easier. "Must be tough," he said quietly. "Tough?" Mr. Callahan shrugged. "Life's tough for everyone in their own way. I've got my health mostly, a roof, a girl who calls me every night just to say goodnight. That's more than a lot of folks get." There was no self-pity in his voice, only gratitude worn smooth by time and hardship. It was the kind of quiet strength that didn't shout but stood firm anyway. Back inside the warehouse after lunch, the disguised man moved through his tasks with new eyes. He watched how Mr. Callahan double-checked every label before placing a box, how he offered a steadying hand to a new worker who dropped a case of detergent, how he never complained, even when his hands shook so badly he had to pause and flex his fingers. Later that afternoon, while restocking near the supply closet, he overheard two younger employees talking. "Did you see Callahan this morning?" one said. "He stayed late yesterday to reorganize the cleaning cart. Said it was easier for everyone. Who does that?" "Honestly? He's the only one around here who actually cares," the other replied. "Travis yelled at him last week for taking too long in the bathroom, and you know what Callahan did? Brought him a coffee the next day. Said he figured he was having a rough morning." The disguised man leaned against the shelf, letting the words sink in. This wasn't just about one rude comment. It was about a pattern of kindness met with indifference, of effort ignored, of respect given freely but rarely returned. That evening, back in his motel room, he opened the personnel file his assistant had sent. Mr. Callahan had been with the company for 7 years. Never late, never called in sick. 3 separate store managers had written glowing notes about his reliability, his honesty, his willingness to help. One even mentioned how he stayed after his shift during a snowstorm to help clear the parking lot so deliveries could get through. And yet, his pay hadn't increased in 4 years. His schedule was always the least desirable: early mornings, weekends, holidays. No one had ever nominated him for Employee of the Month. No one had noticed. Meanwhile, Travis's file told a different story. Good productivity numbers, sure, but buried in the comments were phrases like dismissive tone, creates tension, and multiple informal complaints from night crew. Nothing serious enough to act on, apparently. Just enough to make people uncomfortable. Just enough to make someone like Mr. Callahan feel small. The man stared at the screen for a long time. He thought about the board meeting he'd skipped to be here, about the investors who wanted faster growth, leaner staffing, higher margins, and he thought about a man eating soup on a bench, working not for praise or promotion, but because someone he loved needed him to. He closed the laptop, walked to the window. Outside, the warehouse lights glowed in the dark like a small city of its own. Hundreds of people moving through their shifts, their lives, their quiet struggles and small victories. How many more Mr. Callahans were out there, doing the right thing day after day while the system rewarded the loudest, not the kindest? He made a decision then, not out of anger, not even out of guilt, but out of responsibility. If he was going to lead this company, if his name was on the letterhead, then he owed it to every person who showed up, especially the ones no one else saw. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just observe. He would act, not with grand speeches or dramatic firings, but with something more powerful: fairness, recognition, a chance to restore what had been chipped away by thoughtlessness. But for now, he turned off the light and lay down on the thin motel bed. In his mind, he heard Mr. Callahan's voice again. Life's tough for everyone, in their own way. And for the first time in years, the man who owned everything realized how much he'd forgotten what really mattered. The next morning started like any other. Forklifts humming, radios buzzing, the usual shuffle of boots on concrete. But something in the air felt different. Maybe it was the way people kept glancing toward the loading bay, or how conversations dropped to whispers when someone walked by. No one knew why, but they could sense it. Today wasn't going to be ordinary. The man in the cap arrived early, but he didn't head straight to his usual station. Instead, he stood near the main entrance, watching the crew filter in. Some yawning, some laughing, some already bracing for another long shift. He spotted Mr. Callahan right away, walking slowly but steadily, his lunch bag tucked under one arm. He nodded politely to a couple of coworkers who barely looked up from their phones. Then came Travis. He swaggered in like he owned the place, coffee in one hand, joking loudly with 2 of his regulars. He hadn't noticed the quiet tension building around him. He hadn't noticed the man in the cap at all. At 10 o'clock sharp, a voice crackled over the warehouse intercom. "All hands meeting. Loading Bay A now." Murmurs spread instantly. Meetings like this didn't happen without warning. People exchanged confused looks as they dropped their tasks and headed toward the bay. Even Travis looked puzzled, but not worried. Why would he be? The man in the cap waited until everyone had gathered. Over 100 employees standing in loose clusters, some leaning against carts, others shifting their weight from foot to foot. The sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Then he stepped onto an empty shipping crate near the center. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He just stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle, "My name is Daniel Reeves," he said, voice calm but clear. A ripple went through the crowd. Some frowned. Others squinted, trying to place the name. Then it hit them, the founder, the CEO, the man whose photo was in the company newsletter once a year, always in a suit, always smiling beside a ribbon cutting or a charity check. But here he was, in the same faded uniform, same scuffed boots, same tired eyes they'd seen stacking boxes all week. "I've been working alongside you for the past 5 days," he continued. "Not as your boss, just as another pair of hands. And I've seen a lot." He paused, looked around, made eye contact with as many people as he could. "I've seen folks stay late to help a teammate finish a route. I've seen someone give up their break to cover for a sick parent. I've seen hard work, honesty, and heart, especially from people who never ask for credit." His gaze landed on Mr. Callahan, who stood near the back, looking stunned. "But I've also seen something I never thought I'd see in a place I helped build," Daniel said, his voice dropping slightly. "I heard a supervisor laugh at a man twice his age, mock him for moving slowly, for doing his best with hands that ache and a body that's earned every wrinkle. And worse, I saw no one say a word." The crowd shifted. Some looked down. Others glanced at Travis, who had gone pale, his coffee cup trembling in his hand. "That kind of behavior," Daniel said, "doesn't just hurt one person. It chips away at all of us. It tells people that respect is only for those who look strong, move fast, or talk loud. And that's not who we are, at least, it's not who I want us to be." He stepped down from the crate and walked slowly toward Mr. Callahan. The older man didn't move, just watched him come, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mr. Callahan," Daniel said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you've worked here for 7 years. You've never missed a shift. You've helped more people than you'll ever know. And you've done it all without complaint, without asking for anything in return." He turned back to the group. "Effective immediately, Mr. Callahan is being promoted to Ambassador of Workplace Respect, a new role reporting directly to corporate. He'll help shape how we treat each other, how we listen, and how we make sure no one feels invisible again. And his pay? It's going up, starting today." A beat of silence. Then from the back someone clapped. Then another. Within seconds the whole bay erupted. Cheers, whistles, stomping boots. Mr. Callahan blinked rapidly, his hands shaking for a different reason now. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He just nodded over and over, tears glistening at the corners of his eyes. Daniel waited for the noise to settle before turning to Travis. His voice was firm but not cruel. "As for you, your actions don't reflect the values of this company. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full review. HR will contact you later today." Travis opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around, but no one met his eyes. He nodded stiffly and walked out, head down, the crowd parting silently as he passed. After the meeting, things didn't go back to normal, because normal had changed. People approached Mr. Callahan with shy smiles, handshakes, quiet words of support. One young worker handed him a cold bottle of water. Another asked if he'd show her how he organized the cleaning supplies so neatly. Daniel didn't linger. He changed out of his uniform in the locker room, folded it neatly, and left it on the bench. As he walked out the front gate for the last time in disguise, he passed a group of employees laughing together. Really laughing, not the forced kind. He saw a supervisor helping a new hire lift a heavy box instead of barking orders. He saw Mr. Callahan sitting on a crate, giving gentle advice to a nervous-looking teenager on his first day. None of them knew he was watching. And that was okay, because real change didn't come from speeches or titles. It came from moments, small human moments, where someone chose kindness over convenience, respect over routine. And today, in a dusty warehouse under a bright morning sky, that change had begun. Daniel got into his car, started the engine, and drove away. But he knew he'd be back, not in disguise, not as a ghost in the system, but as a leader ready to listen. Because the best ideas, the truest truths, didn't come from boardrooms. They came from benches under scraggly trees, from tired hands that kept working anyway, and from quiet voices that finally got heard. News travels fast in places where people work side by side, especially when it's something real, something that stirs the heart. Within hours of the warehouse meeting, word had spread to other branches, then to distribution centers, then to stores across the region. Not through official memos or corporate emails, but through texts, phone calls, and hushed conversations over coffee breaks. You heard what happened? The CEO showed up undercover, saw a supervisor picking on an older worker, gave him a promotion on the spot. At first, some didn't believe it. Too good to be true, they said. But then photos started circulating. Grainy phone shots of the man in the cap standing on that crate, Mr. Callahan wiping his eyes, the stunned look on Travis's face. And soon people weren't just talking, they were hoping. Back at headquarters, Daniel didn't waste time. He called an emergency leadership session, not with polished presentations or jargon-filled slides, but with one simple question. How did we let this happen? The room fell quiet. No one wanted to admit that they'd missed it, that in their focus on efficiency, metrics, and speed, they'd stopped paying attention to the human part of the equation. But Daniel didn't want blame. He wanted solutions. By the end of the week, a new initiative rolled out across all locations. Respect first. It wasn't just another training module buried in an online portal. This was different. Frontline workers, cashiers, stockers, delivery drivers were invited to help design it. They shared stories of what made them feel valued and what made them want to quit. They talked about managers who remembered their kids' names and others who acted like they were invisible. From those conversations came real changes. Mandatory empathy training, led not by outside consultants but by employees like Mr. Callahan, who spoke plainly about dignity, patience, and what it felt like to be laughed at when you're just trying your best. Anonymous feedback boxes appeared in every break room with a promise. Every note would be read by someone at corporate within 48 hours. No retaliation, ever. And then came the surprise audits. Unannounced visits by senior leaders not to check inventory, but to sit with crews, eat lunch, listen. Not as bosses, but as people. Meanwhile, Travis's case moved through HR. At first, he argued it was just a joke, that Mr. Callahan knew he was kidding. But when HR quietly reached out to other team members, a pattern emerged. 3 night shift workers admitted they'd been afraid to speak up before. They'd seen Travis cut people down for small mistakes, roll his eyes when older staff asked for help, even hide tools to teach them a lesson. Once they realized they wouldn't be punished for speaking out, the truth came pouring out. Travis wasn't fired for one comment. He was let go because his behavior had created a culture of fear, and that, Daniel made clear in a company-wide message, was unacceptable. We can teach skills, the note read, but we can't afford to lose our humanity. The message didn't just go to employees. It went public. On the company website, in local news interviews, even in a short video where Daniel sat at a folding table in a warehouse break room, speaking directly to the camera without a script. If you work for us, he said, you deserve to be treated like you matter, no matter your age, your role, or how fast you move. Customers noticed. One woman wrote in saying she'd switched to this grocery chain after seeing the video. I want my money to support a place that treats people right, she said. Another store reported a customer leaving a thank you note for a stalker who helped her find a rare item for her mother's birthday. He was so kind, she wrote. It made my whole week. But the real shift happened quietly in the everyday moments. A new hire in Ohio felt safe enough to report a broken handrail after hearing about the feedback boxes. A manager in Texas started greeting every employee by name each morning. Not because it was required, but because he realized he'd never really seen them before. In Arizona, a team voted to nominate their oldest worker, a woman who'd been with the company for 12 years, for a newly created Heart of the Team award. And Mr. Callahan? He didn't just stay in his warehouse. Within a month, he was visiting other locations, not as a figurehead, but as a listener. He'd sit with crews during breaks, ask how things were going, share his own story if it helped someone feel less alone. He wasn't flashy. He didn't give speeches, but people leaned in when he talked, because they knew he'd been where they were. One afternoon in a chili distribution center up north, a young worker pulled him aside. My dad's like you, he said quietly. Works 2 jobs, never complains. But last week his supervisor told him he was slowing the line down. I didn't know what to say to him. Mr. Callahan put a hand on the young man's shoulder. Tell him he's doing just fine. And tell him there are people fighting to make sure folks like him aren't forgotten. Back at corporate, Daniel watched the monthly reports come in. Employee satisfaction scores, stuck in the low 60s for years, jumped to 84%. Turnover dropped by nearly 30%, but the numbers weren't what moved him. It was the handwritten notes that started appearing on his desk. A thank you from a single mom who got her schedule adjusted so she could pick up her kids. A drawing from a worker's granddaughter that read, "Grandpa got a raise. He says it's because he's kind." One evening, Daniel sat in his office long after everyone else had gone home. He opened a folder labeled Culture Updates and flipped through photos. Teams smiling in group shots. A mural painted in a break room that read, "Everyone belongs." Mr. Callahan teaching a group how to properly stack fragile items without rushing. He thought about how easy it would have been to ignore what he'd heard that first day, to chalk it up to just how things are. But he hadn't. And because of that, something broken had started to heal. Change like this didn't happen overnight. It wouldn't last if it was just about one moment, one person, or one decision. It had to be lived every day by everyone. But for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt sure they were heading in the right direction. Not because profits were up, but because people were walking into work with their heads a little higher, their steps a little lighter, and sometimes that was the best metric of all. 6 months had passed since that morning in the warehouse, the morning everything changed. The air still smelled of cardboard and cleaning solution. The forklifts still beeped as they backed up, and the conveyor belts still rolled without pause. But something deeper had shifted. You could feel it in the way people greeted each other. Not with a mumbled, "Hey," but with real eye contact, a smile, sometimes even a question. "How's your day going?" The company was different now, not because of a single grand gesture, but because of 1,000 small ones that added up. Employee satisfaction had climbed to its highest point in over a decade. Turnover had dropped so much that training budgets were being redirected to wellness programs and skill-building workshops. Customers noticed too. Stores felt friendlier, cleaner, more alive. One local paper even ran a piece titled, "When a Grocery Chain Starts Treating People Like People." But none of that was why Daniel stood in the back of the ballroom at the annual company gala, watching the crowd with quiet pride. He wasn't here for the numbers. He was here for the man standing near the stage, adjusting his tie with slightly trembling hands. Mr. Callahan, dressed in a navy suit he'd bought just for tonight, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture straighter than it had been in years. Daniel made his way through the room, nodding at familiar faces, managers, drivers, cashiers, warehouse staff, all mingling together like they belonged in the same story. Because now they did. When he reached Mr. Callahan, he didn't say much at first, just placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled. "You look like you belong up there," he said softly. Mr. Callahan chuckled. "I feel like I wandered into the wrong party. Last time I wore a suit was my daughter's wedding, and that was 23 years ago." "You've earned this," Daniel said. "More than anyone here." A few minutes later, the lights dimmed. The CEO took the stage, not in a three-piece suit, but in a simple blazer and dark jeans. No teleprompter. No rehearsed lines. Just him, a microphone, and the truth. He spoke about the journey, the missteps, the wake-up call, the hard choices. He talked about how easy it is for big organizations to forget the people who keep them running. And then he said something that made the room go still. Real leadership isn't about being in charge. It's about making sure no one gets left behind, especially the ones who never ask to be seen. Then he turned to Mr. Callahan. "Tonight, I'd like to introduce someone who taught me that lesson better than any board meeting ever could." Applause started before Mr. Callahan even stood up. It grew louder as he walked to the stage, slowly, carefully, but with a quiet confidence that filled the room. When he took the mic, he didn't give a speech. He just looked out at the sea of faces and said, "All I ever wanted was to do my job well and go home knowing I hadn't let anyone down. I never thought that would be enough to change anything. But you all proved me wrong." "Thank you," the room erupted. Not polite clapping, real, roaring, tearful applause. People stood. Some wiped their eyes. A young stalker in the back yelled, "We love you, Mr. C," and the whole room laughed through their tears. Later, after the formal part ended and the music started, Daniel found Mr. Callahan sitting alone on a plush bench near the balcony, sipping water and watching the dancers. "Mind if I join you?" Daniel asked. "Always room," came the reply. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the soft hum of conversation and distant laughter. "You know," Mr. Callahan said after a while, "my granddaughter saw the news clip about tonight. She called me crying. Said she's never been prouder. He smiled. That's worth more than any award. Daniel nodded. She's going to be a great nurse. She already is, Mr. Callahan said. Helps her classmates study. Stays late at the clinic volunteering. She says she wants to work somewhere that treats people like people. He glanced at Daniel. Guess she's got a good example now. They both laughed. Warm, easy. The kind of laugh that only comes when you've been through something real together. Before the night ended, Daniel asked one more question. Would you consider mentoring new hires? Not just in your warehouse, but across the company? We're starting a program, Wisdom Circles, where experienced team members share what they've learned, not just about the job, but about showing up with heart. Mr. Callahan thought for a moment. Then he smiled. As long as you promise not to fire me for moving too slow. Never, Daniel said. In fact, I think we could all stand to slow down a little. The next morning, back at the original warehouse, things were already different. Mr. Callahan arrived not in his old uniform, but in a new one, with a small embroidered patch on the sleeve that read, Mentor. A group of new employees waited near the break room. Nervous but eager, he didn't start with rules or procedures. He started with, who's got questions about life, not just the job? And they did. About balancing work and family, about dealing with tough days, about finding pride in small things. From his office miles away, Daniel watched a live feed of the session, not to monitor, but to remind himself why he'd started all this in the first place. He'd come looking for problems. Instead, he'd found a person, and in helping that person, he'd helped heal something in the whole company, and maybe in himself. Because in the end, success wasn't measured in profits or press coverage. It was measured in moments like this, an old man sharing his wisdom, young workers leaning in to listen, and a workplace that finally felt like home. And that was a story worth telling, not just once, but every single day.